right?
Yeah.
It's just those millennials can't figure this out.
Jeff, I was going to say, I use Zoom to teach my students, and every week it's the same exact thing too. I'm like, it's the same link, guys. They're like, we're waiting for your email. It's been a month now. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
God forbid they should go back.
There she is.
Elizabeth.
We were just bad-mouthing you. I don't think you can hear us yet.
Okay, so we've already started recording.
Oh, no.
Go live now onto YouTube and onto Facebook. I don't know if I can do both.
Okay.
But I'm going to try it on YouTube. I think it's better than Facebook.
Okay. So I'm going to mute everybody, and either, if you want me to unmute you, just, well, we'll figure it out. Everyone,
by the time we get all this figured out, we'll be back together again.
That's true. I'm going to mute everybody now.
Wait,
Okay.
we're not live. Are we live on Facebook right now?
Are we live on Facebook yet, Rory?
I'm looking to see. No, not Facebook. I'm trying to get on YouTube first, but it doesn't seem to want to let me do that. So.
All right, well, before I'm offensive, we don't have Troy today. He's going back to a real church where they handle snakes and souls and speak in tongues.
They're letting people in?
He said, you people are weird.
Is he doing that online, or is he actually there?
No, I'm just kidding. He's at home. He's studying for his National Arbor certification. He's got a series of classes. He said that for some reason I make it hard to study, mainly because I give him chores. So now that I'm here with Scotty, he's going
Well, stay away for a while. Give him time to study.
Yeah.
I'm
But I
gonna,
didn't want to say that if we were live, because then I know someone from his family would probably catch on.
hey, Jeff, it's 11:05, so we need to go live. So I'm going to mute everybody except you and Scott.
I'm already doing it.
Unmuted, and then I will start the live broadcast. Hopefully.
Scott wanted to share a song with a guitar. So.
This is based on the reading from today's church.
Are you ready, Rory?
Go live.
Every day we're challenged by the road we have to follow. Every day the road begins to bend. In the freedom of our choices, let us choose the joy of you. May the joy of you speak always from our hearts. In humility we stand firm, if our spirits never part. We walk and speak with courage to be worthy of your love. Give us strength to hold you on our way. May the essence of your presence always shine through what we say. With one spirit and one mind, make clear to us the way. We fear no admonition from the mouths of other men, when we speak to the joy of you, O Lord. Help us stand strong in your light. Believers without pride. Help us to live in your joy. May your spirit, Lord, fill our every word. When we walk with you, we find joy. When we walk with you, we find joy. 'Cause when we walk with you, we find joy. When we walk with you, we find joy. May the joy of you speak always from our hearts. In humility stand firm. If our spirits never part, we'll walk and speak with courage, because we're worthy of your love. Give us strength to hold you on our way. Let us prove to you we want to work for you. Let us choose you, Lord. Don't want to lose you, Lord. We choose joy. Hey, you're muted, Jeff. You're muted, Jeff.
I guess I need to unmute myself. I'm going to tell on Scott now. He wrote that song last night. So he texted me at 1 in the morning and said, I have a song. I'm like, that's cool. So really, really, really excited about that. Thank you for sharing that with us today, Scott. It's okay, I told after the fact, right? Okay. So we're continuing on reading other people's mail, the letter of Paul to the people in Philippi. And we get up to the verse that says, in the Mirror translation, it says, I'm thrilled. Or in the English Standard Version, I rejoice and I will rejoice. Just to remind you of the context behind this letter, Paul had spent 2 years in prison in Caesarea on a trumped up charge. And then he was put on a ship to go to Rome to be judged by Nero. You know Nero, the one that wasn't too nice to Christians. On the way, he was shipwrecked and then bit by a poisonous snake. He got over that. He was stuck there on this island for the winter. Then he finally made it to Rome, and he's under 2 years of house arrest waiting for his trial and probably his execution. He's chained to a palace guard for 24 hours a day. He's on a house arrest, but he's actually chained to a guard for 24 hours, at 24 hours a day, and they change off every 4 hours. It would be a new guard. And he goes on to write in his letter to the people, and all of this, I can just see how the Spirit of Jesus, the Anointed One, like a conductor of music, takes all of this together with your prayers and turns it into a concert that celebrates salvation. My thoughts are not trapped in my head. They roam free in expectation that I will not be ashamed by any contradiction. My immediate circumstances do not distract from my message. I am convinced that our conversation now and always will continue to give accurate account of the magnificence of the Anointed One. The message is incarnate in me. Whether I live or die, it makes no difference. I love that. Paul's like, basically, to me, that is a letter saying, I'm not just enduring, I'm enjoying my life. A lot of times, I remember when I was still working in the corporate world, I would survive until the next vacation, or I would survive until the weekend, or I would survive just until I could get through this situation or this problem or this challenge, and then I could enjoy my life. I want to, on a personal level, learn how to be joyful or choose joy through every situation, problem, or experience in my life. Choose a life of joy. Choosing joy no matter what. There's a story of a couple who was in a horrific car accident. The husband walked away completely unscathed, no problems at all. The wife, however, was incredibly injured. It took several years of surgeries and grafts and work on her body to get her back to where she was before the accident. The last part of it was a skin graft for her face because her face was so badly burned. And they were looking for a very smooth, untouched skin donor. And they just weren't finding what they were. So finally the doctor came up with an idea, and he talked to the husband, and the husband agreed to actually give her the skin off of his behind. And it was a very painful process, but it was a smooth, untouched by sunlight. It was a pure skin. So they took the skin off of her husband's behind, and they skin grafted it, and she turned out amazingly beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Actually, some would say she even looked outwardly more beautiful than she did before the accident. Well, one day they were getting ready for dinner, and she just sat down on the edge of the bed and she started to cry. And she said, "I just don't know how I could ever thank you." And the husband sat down and put his arm around her and comforted her and said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Look at me. Because of you, I am beautiful again. And you can't even sit down without a special pillow. Because of your sacrifice, I am beautiful again. I don't know how I could ever thank you." He paused for a moment, and he looked at her, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and he said, "I don't need your thanks. I get all the thanks that I need every time I see your mother kiss your face." Sheila's like, I saw Sheila's reaction first. She's like, so that was kind of bringing us into the first, there's 3 points that I think that helped me that I wanted to share with you to choose joy when I'm going through challenging situations or facing obstacles that I'm not sure how to overcome. And I'm going to tell you what they all 3 are up front. I don't know if we'll get to all of them today, but hopefully we will. There is perspective, priorities, and power. And of course, my story about the couple in the accident was about perspective. Because we all have challenges in our life. We all have obstacles. And for me, I have found that my perspective, the filter that I look at things, through which I look at things, makes a huge difference in my ability to choose joy. Now, I think most of us have an agreement here. If you want to disagree, fine. There's a difference between joy and happiness. To me, happiness is more external, and whereas joy is, from my understanding and what I'm talking about in this joy, it's this upward focus that everything is good. It's going to be good. And it's just falling into place the way it should. And so there's this, to me, it's a more lasting sense of completeness. So that's how I'm approaching this word joy. It's this idea of the next best thing is yet to come. So, I mean, Paul could have been focusing on his prison, his injustices, all the challenges he'd had up until that point, and rehearsed those. But instead, he wrote in verse 12 prior to this, "I wish to encourage you, dear friends, that the opposition I face, which was meant to defeat the good news, has only served to advance it." So I'm not saying that perspective makes the problem go away. I'm saying perspective diminishes its power to oppress. On a personal level, I just finished writing a paper for Nancy's, you all remember Nancy, she's doing a book. She's starting a process on a book about suicide and having people share their stories of everything that was behind their choice to attempt suicide. And some of the psychological lessons they've learned and all. So I was writing this paper actually yesterday, and I think I realized that perspective is what saved me from that, because some of you know, some of you don't know, at the age of 16, I did attempt to kill myself. It's a long, if you want to read the paper, I'll send it to you. But it was the first step was changing my perspective, the way I filtered things in my life, because it removed the ability for the darkness to oppress me when I no longer chose to focus on the darkness. A challenge that Paul had, which I think is a good example moving forward, is the guard, the Praetorian Guard that he was chained to 4 hours a day for 24 hours a day. He was chained to them. Now, some would say, what an inconvenience. And being in quarantine and stuck with, there's actually that video that Rory was sharing with people where the guy is sitting looking at the camera and they say, because of COVID-19, you will have to be quarantined. Do you, A, be quarantined with your wife and children, or B, and he goes, B. So, jumps right in. And that the idea is, can you imagine, and I think we can, if you're not alone in this quarantine, being 24/7 with somebody, no time of alone. Now, Rory and I, we have our time alone because he sits on the back porch smoking cigars and I sit in the living room reading and doing my crosswords. Yes, I do crosswords. Is that continual presence a nuisance to Paul or an opportunity to Paul? And he says it's an opportunity because he's been able to, every 4 hours, have a different audience for his good news, for his message, for the guard. And he's instrumentally, one person at a time, making a difference in the world. So my first question of the day is, what is the Praetorian Guard in your life? It could be not a continual thing. It may just be an incident or a situation. So for instance, there was one time Rory got a flat tire. And was that a Praetorian Guard? Was that a nuisance? Was that a bother? Or was it an opportunity? It turned out that what started out to seem like a burden turned into an opportunity, because when the AAA tow truck got there to help him with his flat tire, the guy, Rory, being Rory, decided to tip the guy and gave the guy $20. It's not required. That's just who Rory is. You all know Rory. So Rory gives the tow truck driver a $20 tip, and the guy gets a tear in his eye and says, "You don't know how much I needed this." We don't know what he used it for. We don't know if he needed medication for his wife, or maybe that was, I don't remember the story. Rory might interrupt me if he likes. But the idea is that what could have been potentially viewed as a burden, Rory was able to turn into an opportunity. So in your life, if you have stories to share, what is the Praetorian Guard? And is it a burden or is it an opportunity? Anyone want to share a personal experience? Since I took Rory's personal experience, he can't share. Elizabeth, I will unmute you.
Actually, she's waving her hand for me.
I'm so sorry, Scotty.
Okay. Well, one of the things I immediately thought about, and Shirley, I'm sure I've shared this with her, but I had wanted to see an acupuncturist because of some pain I was having in my back. And I went in, and the first thing she says to me, and this is before I then Weight Watchers, she said, "You too fat, you need to lose weight." And I thought, well, I won't say what I thought, but we all know what I thought. And then I thought, wait a minute, this can be a win-win. I have to change my perception of how I look at this. And so I saw that she had a Chinese calendar up there with the different signs on it. And I said, "Well, what sign are you?" And she looked at me like, how you know? And as one of my friends said to me, "Did you tell her that you knew only because you looked at a Chinese placemat at a Chinese restaurant?" Well, no, I didn't tell her that, but she told me she was a snake, and I thought, a dragon, I'm sorry. And I thought, boy, does that make sense. We became really pretty good friends after that, but it was because I had changed my perception And if you don't mind, Rory or Jeff, I'd really like to read something that I just read this morning. And when you were talking about perception, it just really, really hit me again. And this is from 365 Days of Walking the Red Road. So it's about a Native American. And today's reading is, when you arise in the morning, give thanks for the morning light, for your life and strength. Give thanks for your food and the joy of living. If you see no reason for giving thanks, the fault lies in yourself. And Tecumseh wrote this, who was a Shawnee in 1768 until 1813. And I thought, boy, isn't that the truth? That we have to change what our perception. So to look at who my guard would be, it would be myself.
Very good. Anyone else?
I'll go next if I'm still unmuted.
Okay.
So it's just kind of like a little fun story. One of the things, if you find and know me well, that I am the most proud about at all times is having a home. And I'm a little bit obsessed with always like having a house, but having a home that I like own and can make my own and can, yeah, I'm a little control freak, control. And, oh, hi, Indy. Hold on, we have.
You come here. Here, baby.
So it was 3 years ago now. I had just come home from Kuwait after teaching overseas. I was in a little bit of a tizzy because I didn't have what I considered to be like my home. Found this house, fell in love with it, went through hell and high water to actually purchase it, especially having been only paid cash in Kuwait and having no proof of funds and having no job at the time, and just really, really, really took 6 months to close, or 7 months to close. Finally got the house that I had my eye on, was absolutely elated. Immediately jumped into renovations because it was in pretty rough condition, poured my life savings into it, finally got it to where I wanted it to be, and then was mandatory evacuated from Charleston due to hurricanes and flooding. So this house that I had literally put, 8 months of finances and every dime that I'd saved in Kuwait and like all my eggs in one basket. And now I had to leave because it was about to be destroyed. So obviously I got in my car in Charleston. When there's a terrible flood coming, they reverse the interstates. So you can't drive back, you can only drive away. Didn't really know where I was going because it was in such a hurry. And I drove to Atlanta. It was the biggest city that they said, had refuge for that many people when an entire city evacuates. I called a friend of mine on the way who lives in Spartanburg, but on the way to Atlanta. And I was like, what do I do? Where do I go? What are you up to? And she said, there's a music festival happening in North Georgia. Drive to Atlanta and then just stay on 85 or 75, whatever it was. And I'll meet you there. So we drive, and the whole time, all I can think is my beautiful little house is about to wash away. I'm going to lose everything and all my money. And I don't even have a job yet because school hadn't started. And I just moved from across the country. And it was just like this cyclical in my mind, like everything I have is gone. And while I was at the music festival and just feeling like pretty borderline depressed, I looked on stage and I saw what looked like the happiest man I'd ever seen in my entire life, just flipping curls and banging on his African drum and just having the time of his life. And after the show, I was like, I just really want to thank him because he brought me out of this sadness and for a minute let me escape, like everything I have is gone. And I ended up running into him kind of by accident on a trail when I was lost, and we started talking and I got his number and he said, my name is Troy. And here we are.
I love that. I never knew that story about you all. That's a great example. That is a perfect example. Rory, you wanted to say something? You have to unmute or
Yeah, okay, unmuted. Okay, so actually, I was watching a Bob Proctor video the other day, a motivational video, and he said something which to me was an amazing change of a normal phrase that we use. And he said, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
Oh, I like that. Sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. That is awesome. I have another one that I like to use. You know, you've heard the expression, fake it till you make it. I hate that because I don't want anything in my life to be fake. So for me, the way I say it is faith it till you make it. Choose that faith perspective. And from my faith language and the way I would choose is I believe in the God who works all things together for good. And I believe that all things do work together for good. And the emphasis there for me is not the good, it's the all. All things. I'm not saying that all things are great. I'm saying that all things are working together. Every situation, like with Elizabeth's story of meeting Troy, my story of meeting Rory is similar in the fact that I left the church. I was angry at God. I moved to Florida because that's where I didn't know anybody. And my family would never go to the heat. My family is a cold weather family. I am no longer a cold weather person. But I ended up, long story, meeting Rory when I went back to church. So everything, when they, like I said, when things, I've said this many times, when things seem to be falling apart, they're probably, no, they are actually falling together. It may not look the way we want it to look. It may not feel the way we want it to feel. But my faithing it till I make it says it's going to be good. That when I get through this, it's going to be good. You know, many times I think of, there's a parable that Jesus used. He was talking to the crowd and he said, who of you, if your child comes to you and asks you for a fish, you give him a serpent? Who of you, if your child comes to you and asks you for bread, you're going to give him a rock? And you're not really good people. God, who is only good, is taking care of you. It's that idea that only good and perfect gifts come from God. And I thought to myself, so many times we are like children, and we look up and we draw our little pictures of fish, and we say, fish, I want fish. And God lovingly looks down on us and grabs that paper out of our hands and goes, oh, child, you've drawn a snake, not a fish. Because many times the things that we think are fish end up biting us in the ass. Oh, sorry. Getting us from behind, if you will. We think we want, and then when we get what we want, we realize that's not what we really wanted. So for me, faithing it till I make it is still having a goal, a priority, a focus, but realizing that when it doesn't, I don't end up where I thought I was going to end up, where it doesn't look like I want it to look, it's better than it was. And that's why I think Paul says, I'll rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice. Or I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled at what's happening in my life. So that's the perspective choice. It's choosing to look for the good in all things rather than focus. I'm not saying it's going to go away. I'm just saying it's a choice of focus. Does anyone have a thought on that before we go to priorities? Lisa, I will unmute you. Wait, you're not unmuted. For some reason it didn't take. Try yourself. There you go.
Hi. So I guess the guard that I was chained to for forever was the guard of my voice coach back when I was in opera school in Miami. And I'll never forget this. One thing that she said to me that stuck always was, those who can't do, teach. And so for like the next 2 decades, I refused to consider teaching. Like I just thought, well, then that means I'm a failure. That means that I haven't realized my dream of, singing as a full-time occupation. And quite frankly, you know, I was determined to make that work. And so I tried different jobs, but none of them really fit into either how old I was. I tried catering. I was way too old for that. I was exhausted. So I tried different things. And of course, you know, money necessitated that I do something that had a consistent paycheck. And at Public House, I was sitting there at the bar and started talking to this woman who was the I want to say one of the assistants at Gwinnett School of Music. And we were just talking and she said, "You have such a bubbly personality. What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a performer. I'm a singer." She said, "Really? Do you have a degree?" I said, "Well, yes, I have a degree in voice." She's like, "Well, you'd be the perfect type of person to come teach at our school." And I thought, okay, God, this is just all too weird and a coincidence. I think maybe I'm going to just let bygones be bygones and give up this whole 2-decade struggle of refusing to teach. And I can't tell you, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm, you know, it took me a while to figure it out and I was resisting. And then God's like, fine, I'm going to just drop someone in your lap and just give you the connection to get you started. So that's my story.
I like that. What was the phrase she said to you?
Oh, the phrase she said to me?
Yeah.
Well, she said, you know, you have such a bubbly personality. In the beginning.
Yeah.
Those who can't do, teach. Can't.
Okay.
So
Well,
I cannot be a successful singer.
Yeah, those who can do, those who can't teach.
There you go.
My thing would be those
Yeah.
who can do, and those who teach grow. So we're talking about perspective, and I think the next step that I see in Paul's letter to the Philippians is priorities. I don't know who said this, but I love the statement. So Rory, I think it was probably a seminar that Rory and I had attended, but it's either you decide what's important in your life or you allow others to decide by the problems and the situations they bring into your life. I'm going to say that one more time. Either you decide what's important in your life, or you allow others to decide by the problems and situations they bring into your life. Or shorten that, there's 2 ways to live your life: problems or priorities. You can either be a firefighter or proactive. Yeah, I got my stories mixed in my head. But you could either fight the fire or prevent the fire. That was the word I was looking for. You can either fight the fire or prevent the fire. Paul says in verse 17 that they were thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. That's in the English Standard Version. They were thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. They're trying to make my life miserable. And then he goes on to say, I'm thrilled. The Anointed One is the topic of conversation. Even bad publicity continues to advertise. I love the Mirror translation of that verse. So he's prioritized his focus on his priority is his ministry, is his message, is his sharing of the gospel. He did not let them steal his joy. Joy killers only have the power in our life that we give them. That's kind of a changeover from, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt that said, no one can intimidate you without your permission, if I'm saying that correctly. And no one can steal your joy without your permission. What is, and you don't have to answer, this is more of a rhetorical, unless you want to, but think about what is the most important thing in your life. The most important thing that you want. What is that you want, the focus in your life? And then the follow-up question is, does the way you live your life, do the choices you make in your life support that desire? I think many times, for instance, quarantine, I have gained 7 pounds. And like the shirt I'm wearing right now, I would not go out in public because it's so tight around my stomach. I have gained 7 pounds during quarantine. And you all know that I have this obsession with losing weight. That is my thing. I always talk about weight loss. But I came to realize as I was writing this down, because I thought, yeah, I would like to lose weight, but I'm not making the choices. I'm not walking every day like I used to. I'm not keeping track of what goes into my mouth. You know, you do need to burn more than you consume. That is the thing. So that's a very superficial, but in my life, am I making those choices? One of the things that I wrote in the paper for Nancy was that when I finally realized that I had some value, this was coming out of the darkness of self-loathing. When I finally began to realize I had value, that my life was worth something, I consciously made choices that fed and nurtured that perspective. So I changed my friends. I changed the things that I read. I changed the things that I watched on TV. It sounds weird, but I just became very aware of how I was affected by external situations. And I chose to change my external input until I developed an internal strength that was no longer influenced so greatly by those things outside. What is important to you? And you don't have to answer that part of it, but how do you choose in your life when there's so many distractions, actions or whatever, that elevate you into your priorities? And anyone can answer that, because I have my ways, but I think each of us has different mental fortitudes, if you will, that give us the strength to make those choices. What are some ways that you personally have made the choice to honor the priorities, your purpose, if you will? I believe that each of us has a God-given purpose. I think they all unite into the one of loving God and loving each other, and being that expression of God's love in this world, but they all look very differently. How do you stay focused on your priorities in your life? Oh, I'm sorry, Christine. I was too busy singing. You are unmuted.
Oh, hi. Well, obviously, this is now the most important thing. But I was just thinking about shifting perspectives and basically, as a new mother, and many moms out there know that there's the difficult thought or the thought process of losing yourself or having to shift yourself to prioritize baby, prioritize. You're now no longer who you were. You are now this new person, and in a beautiful way, but it's hard. I should say, go back to this bad place to think about all the things I'm losing, and it's a very negative place to be. And how I prioritize that and make it positive, especially us being isolated, is shifting that perspective. Is actually seeing into the future of when we aren't given the opportunity, the very rare opportunity of being stuck together, of being isolated in the house, and being able to enjoy all of the precious moments that are now, that will eventually, she'll grow out of being, this cute. She'll be in a different kind of cute. She'll have different different things that she needs in her life. And right now we have the opportunity to connect and really truly be, I guess, mother to daughter one, you know, as opposed to being so completely focused on other things. Jobs will come back, and I don't have to be sad about that, knowing that that will eventually be there again, but this will not be. So I guess I prioritize her by letting go of the thoughts that cloud my head, like saying, just, you know, don't think about those things. Don't think about who you were, because you're no longer that person anymore. You're somebody else, and that's not a bad thing. That's a different thing. You're now a mother, and it comes with a whole other a whole other world, a whole other life. And that, I guess, shifting that perspective into that's how I shift that perspective into something positive, and I prioritize my husband and my home and my daughter that way, by not dwelling on the past and not dwelling on those thoughts. And I if that makes sense. Sorry if I don't make sense.
No, you make complete sense. I mean, what I'm hearing is not dwelling on the past or focusing on the future, but living in the now. Yeah, living in this moment and trusting this moment to lead to the next.
We're not going to have this in the future. We're going to go back to normal, or whatever the normal is. And will we, and asking that question of ourselves, will we actually wish we were back here? Wish we had the time to ourselves.
I'm never leaving my house. Again.
But you know, that thought does come to my mind, like when we're busy running around and having all these kinds of responsibilities and back to paying all of our bills and not putting bills off, you know, are we going to wish we were back here?
Or will we take this lesson and set aside those times so that we can come back to our personal quarantine? Okay, Rory. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's right. So, you know, it's interesting when she was saying that, because it's like, are we ever really happy and content and have joy in the present? I know when it's winter time and people are all wrapped up, I can't wait for summer. I can't wait for it to warm up. And then it warms up and they're like, I can't wait for it to cool down again. This is too hot. And I mean, people just are constantly don't experience joy in the moment. They're always either looking backwards or forward. And so I think, you know, I know Christina made a really awesome point there by everybody's complaining now about being locked inside and not being able to do anything. And it's 6 months from now, when they're working 60-hour work weeks and whatever, they're going to be saying, man, I wish that coronavirus had come back, because I want to spend time at home. So it's, you know, it is interesting, but
live in the now. Okay.
Being able to focus in the now and have joy in the moment.
Okay. Clemence.
Yes, hi. I wanted to bounce on this. I personally don't know a lot of people, even on Facebook. I don't see a lot of people complaining that much about the isolation part or being bored. All the folks I know, they're like, I don't have enough hours in my day. I'm doing all those things I never been able to do because now I'm focused on them and I can do them now. So I don't hear that much of complaint. I hear a lot of complaint about what's going on. You know, is it a virus? Is it the flu? Can we go out? Can we not? This is an entire different world. But I would say, personally, for the past year, I've had to focus on mindset, or I don't know where I would be today. So I had to do that. And what this isolation allowed me to realize, it's something that you just said at the very beginning, Jeff, is at the very beginning of this quarantine thing, I realized I'm extremely joyful right now. I love this thing. It makes me super creative. I have to find other ways to do the things I used to do. It's actually brought me back joy in my life that I had completely forgot about. I wanted happiness because that's what we're told to do. You have to be happy in your life. You know, if we read self-help books, it's because we're broken. So every time we read a self-help book, oh, I'm broken. The book is going to help me finding that happiness again. But if we don't do anything with joy, it doesn't matter. And that's what I realized at the very beginning, is like, I need to bring back joy in my life. And since then, it's like all doors are finally, everything is making sense again in my life. And it's actually pretty cool. So I'm very grateful for the joy and everything else. I know there's another point in there I wanted to make and I forgot, but I hope that makes sense to everyone. And that, oh yes, distractions. Before quarantine, I was doing tasks. I was meeting people for work, for coffee here and there, and driving in half an hour, 45 minutes one way and the other. But it was all distractions because I had no joy in doing that. I thought I was happy. I loved my job and what I do in sharing wellness, but I didn't have this profound joy to do those things. And now I have found it again, and I'm shifting a lot of things to keep myself in that joy.
So focusing on the things that are important to you, it's kind of a circular effect in that you're focusing on the things that bring you joy, which brings you joy to do the things that you want to focus on. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do them differently with a new light, and not how am I going to do this? How am I going to get money? This pressure that we have, especially here in America, it's all about the dollars. And to go back into the joy is so much more fulfilling than just about thinking, how am I going to do this? How did this going to happen? And so to be in the joy and the faith, as you were saying before as well.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else? Oh yeah, Scott, I'll unmute you.
Thanks. I was thinking just about what you said last week. You know, we talk about a lot of stuff every week, and it's hard to remember everything. But I know that happiness is not a formula, but it comes down to what you said last week, and everybody's reinforcing it. And that is to be grateful for what we have and to reframe where we are. And with those two things, we can really control our happiness. And I think that's what everybody's saying. And I just wanted to bring it up again because it's what you said last week, but it's so easy for us to forget what we say from week to week.
And that's why we keep repeating ourselves. I mean, I repeat myself. I use the same stories. I use the same axioms for me as well, because that's how we learn, is repetition. So thank you, Scott. I want to speak, unless someone else, I thought of something that Clement said, gosh, 3-4 weeks, I don't know, a while ago. Clement said something about we need to allow for ourselves to be in those dark places and not just deny that they're there. Go through them and experience them. I don't know if she remembers saying that or not, but it was a very powerful thought for me, because many times we confuse choosing joy with ignoring problems, and it's not the same thing. So I thought to read I worked on this paper yesterday, so it's very fresh in my mind. I wanted to read, after I told the story of my attempted suicide, I said my journey upward began with a learning reversal, or an unlearning of who I was. The first step was exposure. This step was not by choice, but hindsight reveals that it was a pivotal moment. I was outed by friends from college and forced out of my secret darkness. This was a painful process, and it did not dispel the darkness. It merely disrupted the duality and unified every part of my life in the darkness where I lived. We all have secrets. We all have fears. I believe the majority, if not all secrets, are rooted in our fears. When I was no longer hiding behind the fear, all that was left was me. Granted, it was a me that I still loathed, but it was still all me. The next step was connection. Since I had nothing to hide, I had nothing to lose. My life had no value, and my choices reflected that perspective. My social interactions were Epicurean at the very least, but this resulted in connection with others as me, purely me, and I began to accept myself as I was accepted. Fortunately, one of those connections led me to a non-judgmental faith-based group that emphasized the unconditional nature of God's love. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. And it goes on. But one of the things that I had not recognized in my life that led me to this perspective of choosing joy in all things was going through that upheaval of exposure, if you will. I was forced to be all me. Now, if I had chosen to be all me, perhaps the journey would have been a little shorter and I wouldn't have gone into it with so much. But it's accepting me right now, where I am, with no shame. This is who I am. I'm not saying that you're going to stay that person, like Christina said earlier, you know, who you were, you're not that person anymore, and who you're going to be, you're not there yet. But we all are in this moving process. And for me, the point that I've been pondering since writing that, and I'm probably going to ponder it through the week, is choosing joy begins with exposure. Being 100% me and hiding nothing. And being thankful for who I am and where I am at this point in my life. And that to me was just brought back to my mind when I was thinking about Clement saying, you know, we need to allow ourselves to go through the darkness, because the things that we're going through in the darkness help us to realize many lessons that we would never learn otherwise. Just a thought. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Looking for hands. No. Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie. You are unmuted.
Okay, so something I just wanted to say really quick was that I've learned that I can experience joy even in the darkness, even in intense pain, because I feel that pain daily, 24/7, since I lost Colton. But I've learned that I can still feel joy, even in the midst of intense pain. I can still be joyful in my life, even with that. And even in our living situation, it sucks. But you know what? I still feel joy. Because why not? I guess. I mean, nothing. I mean, it's going to change, but right now it's not. So might as well be joyful and the moment.
I like the text you sent me last week that you woke up and said to Mike, do you think the cockroaches will miss us when we're gone?
Yeah. That's right. Do you think they'll miss us? Yeah, I'm started naming them.
Okay, so the next point, perspective and priorities. The last point that I feel helps me to choose joy is power, where I draw my strength. In verse 19, which is where I ended at the beginning, I love how Paul says, I can just see how the Spirit of Jesus, the Anointed One, like a conductor of music, takes all of this together with your prayers and turns it into a concert that celebrates salvation, that celebrates deliverance, that celebrates resolution. So I see three pieces of what he's saying. He's relying on the power of God, and we can use whatever label you want for God, but on power of God. He's relying on the prayers and the support of others, and he's relying on celebration of that deliverance. Those are the three focuses that bring him to this point of, this is just a beautiful concert. There's the external power of God, the external power of others, and then my power of celebration from within that brings me to this point of choosing joy. There's a Robert Merton. Some of you may have heard of him. He wrote this in Social Theory and Social Structure. Self-fulfilling prophecy is in the beginning a false definition of the situation, evoking a new behavior which makes the original false conception come true. This perpetuates a reign of error, for the prophet will cite the actual course of events as proof that he was right from the very beginning. I'm going to read that one more time because I think it bears repeating. Self-fulfilling prophecy is in the beginning a false definition of the situation, invoking a new behavior, which makes the original false conception come true. This perpetuates a reign of error, for the prophet will cite the actual course of events as proof that he was right from the very beginning. And my question is, have you ever noticed that whatever you expect to happen usually does? It's one of my axioms is you always find what you're looking for. You always find what you're looking for. If you see darkness, if you're looking for darkness, you will find darkness. If you are looking for light, you will find light. If you were looking for your keys, well, I take that back. I don't always find my keys. Sometimes Rory has to do that for me. But any perceptions, thoughts, stories, sharing that you have on learning the truth of this statement that you always find what you're looking for. Elizabeth, unmute yourself. I'm getting lazy.
It just reminds me of one of my father's like mantras that he drilled into my mind. Thoughts become things, and visualizations become manifestations. And even as a little kid, my dad is big on like vision boards and writing down affirmations. But I learned that that didn't work for me because I don't go back and read it, or I don't go back and look at it. And so he was like, all right, well, what do you look at the most throughout the day? My phone. And so he said, put what you want as the background on your phone. And ever since then, that's what I've always done, because I don't know, hundreds of times a day I pick up my phone and there it is. Or whatever I want to focus on at the time, whether it be, you know, finishing school or improving my relationship or buying a house, it's always the background on my phone is my focus at that time. Because the more I think about it, the more I am going to, it's kind of like you said before, like, am I doing the steps that it takes to get where I want to be? And that for me is a step that works, where it's like, okay, this is the goal. So what path do I need to create to get there? And I think a lot of, I know like Christina was saying earlier, it made me think of a lot of the joy we hold is in that hope, but that like expectancy type hope, where it's like, I expect things will improve. I expect things to be better and brighter. But I think also there's a component that, like Clemence was saying, where even in this darkness and you need to go through it and not just hope for better, but appreciate where you are now and what can I gather right now, and not just what's on the other side, but you know, can I stay home with my baby now? Can I improve my relationship? Can I improve my house? Can I work out at home? Like all this time that we all of a sudden have to put towards the things that do matter most to us. Are we sitting around watching Netflix and still numbing our brain? Or are we, you know, saying, all right, it's finally time to do whatever?
So if Rory were to speak, he would say, Jeff, Stop looking at TikTok. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Anyone else? Whoops, what did I do? Did I lose everybody?
We can see you.
Okay, sorry. Oh, here, we're back. Okay. I don't know where I clicked, but I did something. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, then the last piece is verse 21 of this letter, and this is where we'll stop for today. In the King James Version, it says, "For me to live is Christ, to die is gained." Or for me to live is the anointed one, to die is gained. Translating that, oh, yes.
Are you saying gain, G-A-I-N?
Yes,
Die?
yes.
Okay.
In other words, from my perspective, what Paul is saying, that right now he's serving his purpose in life, and now if he were to die, he's just moving on to the next thing. He's passing through a doorway. There's no loss. He's actually it's an upward spiral. It's an attitude, a perspective of the best is always yet to come, from the way I'm reading it. But I was just curious how each of us, because we all, like I said, we're all wired differently. God has blessed us with a plethora of perspectives, philosophies, even theologies. How would you finish that sentence? For me to live is blank. Now, I could, on a personal level, I could finish it. For me to live is the anointed one. I am striving to be the presence of God in this world, the expression of God's love in this world. But beyond that, for me to live it's this idea, for me, joy, what I write here, joy is living beyond myself in this world. So how would you finish that sentence if you want to? For me to live is... Oh, Elizabeth.
Is to help and love others.
Okay. Scotty.
Is to learn.
For me to live is to learn. Lisa, I'm unmuting you now.
Okay. For me, it's to serve and to share and to encourage.
Okay. Anyone else? No more hands? And I know in our mind, you probably answered that and you don't want to share. It's okay. In your mind, finish that sentence. And then I ask you this. Are the choices that you make, the perspectives that you choose, feeding into that desire of who you believe you're living to be? That's the challenge for me, because I've realized in quarantine, quarantine has actually been a gift, I think, for a lot of us. I'm not diminishing the pain or anything that people have gone through, but in many ways, our planet is happier. I know the oil companies are not happier. Rory was telling me that today that there's like all these oil tankers drifting off out offshore because we're not using gas. So we're not putting that into the environment. So for me, I've been using this quarantine to refocus what's really important in my life. Really along the lines of what Clemence was saying, she's now no longer distracted and able to focus on those things that bring her joy. And to me, the things that bring you joy are the things that you're meant to be and meant to do. I do not believe that God created us to live in misery and darkness. It's a cycle. Sometimes you have to go, well, you know what? I go to bed at night because it's dark, and I get up in the morning, and in an emotional way, sometimes I shut down, and sometimes I'm turned on. It's just the cycle of who we are. But there is joy in that process, especially when I get to sleep in. But there's joy in the process of being 100% you. Anyone else? Any closing thoughts? Okay. Well, then that's all I have for today. I'm going to...
We got Scotty over here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scotty.
Well, someone called me yesterday and asked me to bring this to service this morning, that we just pray. They wanted to be anonymous, but to pray. And I would say it's basically about relationships is how I would reframe it. So just so I'll put it out there.
Well, actually, this would be a good time to close with prayers and concerns that we have. And just unmute yourself, if that's okay. Dennis?
The doctor tomorrow.
You go to the doctor tomorrow?
And hopefully get the cast off.
Oh, good, good. Okay.
But through this, you know, it's made me realize just how strong Rob and my relationship really is. And just how much we appreciate God putting us together.
Amen. Okay.
You know, yes, but it could be worse. I've got one friend that's fought cancer 4 times. It's come back again.
Okay.
Another friend that's had to have a defib unit planted in his heart. You know, so it could be worse.
We could all say that. Corey.
And I know that everybody watching on YouTube would be happy to pray for everyone who's announced. I just want to remind everybody, though, that it is being broadcast live on YouTube. So if it's something that might be very personal to you, just God knows what it is, and the people can pray for it, knowing that God knows what it is. But just say, I have a, you know, you don't have to go into detail. I just wanted to remind everybody it is being broadcast live. So.
Okay. Clemence, did I see you raise your hand, or were you just scratching? Okay. You really should shower more than once a week. I'm just saying. Anyone else have a prayers or concerns, or because you know what, we take these with us. It just isn't a one-time sharing. It's like through the week. And when I think of you, if I think of someone, my rule is if God brings someone to my mind, you're in my prayers at that moment. And I don't have to know what it is. I just know that we lift each other up with the power of the love that we project to each other. Lisa.
So my prayer request, I think, applies to a lot of people who, because of the quarantine, are having to embrace technology. I just would like a prayer request because I'm really trying to take the whole teaching music online, and I'm having to learn all kinds of technical things that interact with keyboards, and it's just very complex. And I mean, I know I'm still young-ish, but it's a challenge for me. And I know there's a lot of people that are trying to sustain their employment, and they're having to make, you know, challenging adjustments, which can be a blessing because you grow. But I just pray for everybody who's in a similar boat, which is probably the whole nation to some degree or the other.
Okay. And Rory.
Okay, yeah, I'd like the most obvious of it is put out prayers of people who are affected by COVID-19, both financially as well as physically, and also their families, and just putting prayers out for all the people. And we're talking about a lot of people are affected by this right now and need our prayers.
You know, I want to throw up a prayer of gratitude for Clemence. I'm going to single her out. One of the highlights for me of being locked up was the traveling circus that is Clemence. No, she gifted us with, I didn't even know who, I didn't recognize everyone because they were so far away, but there was 4 cars, I think. 4 cars drove up. So they were social distancing, each person by themselves. They got out of the car. Clemence had her street organ. They had noodles with gloves on them. And they did this kind of circus performance in our front yard. And it was so fun and brought so much joy. I mean, Aloma came outside and stayed 6 feet away. But I know that she did it for some other people too, and I just wanted I wanted to publicly thank her for that. And I guess if she's going to, are you considering doing that on a regular basis for hire, perhaps?
It's a big perhaps, because this is not my focus for work truly. But we may do it a second time, because we didn't get to, we were 4 women and we were allowed to do it to 3 different houses each, but we didn't have the time to get to the 3 last people. So it's gonna be maybe just this, and the quarantine is ending. So, but yeah, we'll see if people are self-quarantined themselves. I think that's the kind of folks we'll go and visit.
Okay. But anyway, that was such a gift, and I wanted to give thanks for that. Stuart.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure to be crazy in front of your house.
Prayers for all those in nursing homes right now that are not being able to get visitors. They're in at-risk situations. In particular, there's a nursing home that I used to visit when I worked at Smile. Got 3 very good friends that we visited every week. And the last I heard, I called last week and they're doing well. But just prayers for those people, because they really are isolated, terribly isolated.
True. Very true. And prayers for the high winds. They're supposed to get up to 35 miles an hour today. So prayers of safety. Elizabeth.
This kind of follows up what Stuart was saying, but the exact opposite. Prayers to the class of 2020. A student that I've mentored since he was 12 is on track to be the first person in his family to graduate high school. It's been a really big deal, really high crime area, low achieving schools, was in special ed for a long time, was in behavioral classes for a long time. And it really came down to not being able to cope with the situation that he was in. And now we're so proud that he's graduating, and graduation is up in the air, how that will occur, if he'll just receive a diploma in the mail, or if they'll get to do some sort of online platform. It's just heartbreaking, because we've worked so hard to get him to this point. And not just that one, obviously many of my students, all of the class of 2020, I taught when they were in 7th grade at this one school. And because it is such a tumultuous area, it's a really, really big deal for these kids to be graduating even high school. I know one of my students reached out to me. She's gotten 10 scholarships. She'll be going to college on a full ride. She was also just adopted at the age of 17. But just to be able to say, like, she has a family now, and her older sister, who's gone through similar stuff, just joined with the Air Force. And just seeing my kids doing like really, really amazing things makes me so proud. But it's also heartbreaking that some of them were not able to take the SAT or the ACT because they can't test. So that's kind of putting their college acceptance in jeopardy, and not being able to walk across and accept a diploma for a lot of them is a big deal, especially when you're the first in your family eligible. So prayers to the class of 2020.
And holding out that confident expectancy that this is all going to fall into place the way it should be. And they'll be able to look back and say, oh, this is why this happens. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But I love those opportunities that we have to connect the dots of why things happen in our life. Anyone else? Okay. Rory, if you would unmute. Oh,
Carrie's got her hand up.
Who? Carrie. Oh, yes, Carrie.
There we go. My son Nick is also part of the class of 2020.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not, he seems to be bummed, but he has a good attitude about it, if that makes sense. Yeah. But just prayers for him, but also prayers for us as we are in a time of transition.
Okay.
Yeah, and things will just fall into place, and I know they will.
Yes. I'm going to unmute everybody and bring us to a close. Will you repeat after me? May the Lord.
Lord.
May the Lord
Watch between.
Watch between
Me and thee.
me and thee.
We're absent.
our
Absent.
One from the other.
One from
the
the other.
It goes a little smoother in person, but I still think it's important to just be reminded to always be lifting each other up and watching for each other. So prayers to all.
Always.
All have a blessed day, a blessed week. And if you want to stay on and talk, you're all invited. So